Hey, how are you? I live on the northwest side. I'm now telling we're in the church still there, but it's oh yeah. Yeah. I like that area. It's just so far from my office. Depending on what time of day. Yeah. That's where I wanted to buy, but I think it's to buy I'm buying water. I see how you are. No, you don't want to be seen with me, Dave. You're going to send me away alone to the hotel room.
Oh, the rehab. I don't know.
Sorry, talk to me. She wanted to know who the contact was for Billy. We took care of that 2 days ago. Yeah, because it's only one renewal. It's not a mandate, but I shouldn't say mandate. Every October 1, Texas Workforce Administration changes the amount of benefit paid to folks on UC. I did say it was 60 days before 10-1.
Good evening. I'd like to call the South San Antonio Independent School District regular meeting. Today's date is Wednesday, July 18, 2018, and the time is 6 p.m. I'd like the call to order and, the roll call. Mrs. Martinez.
Mrs. Angelina Seguin.
Present.
Mr. Luis Ibarra Jr. Mr. Edward Munguia.
Here.
Mrs. Leticia Guerra. Mrs. Connie Prado. Present. Mr. Luis Rodriguez.
Here.
Mrs. Elsa Flores.
Present. Okay, now we're going to go into the Pledge of Allegiance, Texas Pledge, the prayer, and then the call to action.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
honor
the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you for this opportunity to meet together. Please help us to come together to be a shining example of good and truth for the sake of the students at South San ISD. Amen. Amen. Our new call to action.
All students enjoy successful education experiences, empowering them to make decisions while enriching their lives in the future they create.
Board members, normally we would go to close executive session. I have been informed that Mrs. Guerra will not be in attendance today, but Mr. Ibarra is running about an hour late. So I would, if I hear no objection, I'd like to continue with the meeting and hold close executive session when he comes in. Are there any objections? Okay, let's move forward. Superintendent's remarks, Dr. Saavedra.
So beginning members of the board, good evening. I'd like to start my remarks by introducing some new staff members that are with us this evening. I'd like for Ms. Eva Cepeda to stand up and be recognized. Ms. Cepeda is our new executive director for finance as well. I also have Mr. Scott Stevens, and he's our new director of food service. Some of you had an opportunity to meet Scott when we did Lone Star Governance. He joins us from Pleasanton ISD, and so welcome. He's been with us a few weeks already. The next employee I'd like to recognize is not new to the district. He's been with us. He's been serving as an assistant principal at our high school, but he does have a new assignment as coordinator for safety and security of our district. Mr. Gary Long. Gary. I also want to, in my remarks, comment on the upcoming TRE election scheduled for August 14th. The election day is August 14th. Early voting starts on July the 30th, going through August the 10th. An opportunity for our community to exercise their right to vote and decide which direction this district will head in the future. I encourage all of our community members that are registered voters to participate in this election and vote on election day or during early voting. Thank you.
Presentation and reports. Number 1, presentation number 5 on 2018-2019 budget presentation. Dr. Saavedra.
I'm calling on Mr. Zamora, and he will present our fourth budget workshop, fifth budget workshop. And he'll walk us through it. Not much has changed from the last one, but it is an opportunity for the board to provide us their thoughts and input. Most likely this will be the last budget workshop before we present adoption of the budget, unless the board is seeking another workshop prior to that.
Thank you, Dr. Saavedra, members of the board. Tonight's presentation is going to be very similar to the previous one. I'm going to show you information based on our budget with and without the TRE. Our first line has projected revenue and appropriations. Without a TRE, our projected revenue is $71,436,326. Total appropriations is $72,771,467. This will give us a deficit of $1,335,140. With the TRE, our revenue is projected to go up to $77,755,877. Our appropriations will change to $77,134,853 with an estimated surplus of $621,024. Within the appropriations with ATR, of course, we included a compensation plan with a 4% increase. This is the budget by function. So this is how we will present the budget, minus the last line item where the compensation plan is, in the with TRE column. That will be allocated to the appropriate function levels based on the compensation plan. Ultimately, this information, the other changes with the column with TRE, of course, are the reductions that we would no longer be forced to be made, which is reduction at the campus level for positions that the campuses have recommended in case we do not pass a TRE. Unless the board wants, I won't read the functional amounts. I'll just give you a minute to glance at it and ask me any questions if you have any on this slide.
Okay, board members, the floor is open if you have any questions on this slide. Mr. Rodriguez?
Tracy, can you explain that facility acquisition and construction line? Because, doubles basically.
So,
How does that work without TRE or with TRE? What does that include?
so the district, I think the last couple of years has been given more thought to the preventive maintenance and improvement of our facilities, given the age. And so we have been allocating this last year about $950,000 to capital improvements, which is mainly for replacement of HVAC systems, roof renovations or repairs, things of that nature. So as part of the reductions going into the budget, in case we don't pass a TRE, we're having to increase the amount that we could allocate for those priorities.
Let me comment on that as well, Mr. Rodriguez. 5 years ago when I joined the district, one of the things we discovered was that the district at the time was not allocating in the budget capital improvements for facilities. Whenever an air conditioner or heater broke down and as I said we had to spend $100,000, we would come to the board and it would be a budget amendment of $100,000 to fix it. And I believe that had gone on for a number of years. So the very first budget we recommended in 2014, I believe, we actually put in about $1.5 million, not only for capital improvements for facilities, but for the replacement of vehicles as well, because that also was not being budgeted for, and so forth. I think after a couple of years of budgeting about $1.5 million, we brought it down to about $900,000 to $1 million, because by that point we had replaced most of the vehicles that we needed to replace, and we needed to concentrate really on the facilities. It is real important that the district continue to invest in its facilities, or they'll continue to run down. That's why we have left nearly $500,000, even if the TRE does not pass, in there, because it's an important item that the district needs to continue forward.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other comments, questions, or concerns? I have one, and so on that compensation plan, it says without the TRE it's 0, and then with the TRE it's at $2.5 million. Can I get some clarity as to exactly what's going to happen there?
Yeah, let me walk the board through that. The administration's intent is to recommend to the board a pay increase for all employees at 4% if the TRE passes. Without the TRE passing, I'm not certain that we would recommend anything. We simply would not have the resources or revenue available to recommend any kind of pay increase. The 4% that I talked about in reference to the TRE passing would be a one-time 4% for all employees, and we'll set teachers aside for a minute, but we're coming back to teachers. For all other employees other than teachers and teacher contracts, which include counselors, librarians, nurses, diagnosticians, I believe, and I believe most of them. Everybody else is the one-time 4% of whatever their salary was this past year. And that 4% would be distributed, again, if the TRE passes. 2% on or about September the 1st, and the additional 2% prior to the midwinter break, sometime in December. That's how we'll get distributed. So that would be all employees except teacher and teacher contracts. For the teachers and teacher contracts, we would be recommending a 2% increase in the salary schedule, meaning that it goes into the schedule and that 2% repeats itself, unless it's pulled out later, but it will repeat itself. And the primary reason for putting that into salaries for teachers is that the district has made great gains in closing the gap on what we pay our teachers compared to our competitive school districts around us. And I think it's important that we not lose that ground. And as I look around, many of the other districts are looking at about 2% salary increase for teachers. So I think now that we've closed the gap, I think we will be able to maintain that gap closure if we allow 2% to go into the salary schedule of teachers. And that 2% is based off the median of their pay grade. Teachers will also receive a 2% one-time additional pay. So in essence, teachers get a total of 4%. It just says broken down where 2% goes into their schedule and the other 2% would be one time. And that remaining 2% would be distributed 1% in September and 1% in December. And that's generally the pay compensation that we're looking at for employees if the TRA does pass.
Okay. And then the other question I had is on the 95, it says payments to JJAEPS. Could you elaborate what that acronym is?
Linda, it's disciplinary, yeah.
Yes, it's JJP,
Juvenile.
something.
I wasn't sure if you wanted
I think
to.
it's juvenile alternative
We
education
just call it
program.
JJEP.
But I don't know what the second is, yes. Thank you, that's it, juvenile justice.
And under these appropriations, where would the after-school program be?
The after-school program, I want to say 10, 11, function 11.
On the instruction? Okay. That was it, those were my questions. Mr. Munguia?
JC, I know you've said this in previous meetings, but what was our 17-18 school year budget revenue and appropriations?
Or 17, 18. 76 million. Give me a minute. I'm sorry, I can't find the exact number, but
We can get back to that. I would have thought it was your screensaver, but, but we can do that. We'll bring that up later today. Sure.
Okay, was that it, Mr. Munguia? Yes. Okay, Ms. Flores?
Yes, back to the compensation plan with the TRA, the 2.5 million. Does that include benefits as well, Dr. Sadek? Besides the,
yes.
Complete package,
besides
yes.
the,
correct.
okay, with benefits.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Is there any other comments, questions, or concerns on this slide?
Okay.
Okay, we can move on. JC?
Okay. So this next slide is our summary budget for our debt service. Our local revenue is projected to be at $7,192,560. The total appropriation, I'm sorry, that's local revenue. State revenue will be $5,042,231, giving us a total revenue of $12,234,791. Total appropriations equals $13,246,625, giving us a deficit of $1,011,834. Our projected fund balance for 17-18 is $3.9 million, or $3,974,055. After the 18-19 deficit, we would have a projected fund balance of $2,962,221.
Let me comment on this a little bit, because I know we've discussed it off and on at various times. As you can tell, the debt service fund balance, which presently is at $3.9 million, drops to 2.9 because we're basically taking $1 million to make this work. So it's clear to see that within 3 years, if we continue the same path, it will be depleted. At some point in the future, maybe one, at the most 2 years from now, hopefully just one, the district will most likely need to increase its INS tax rate from 41 cents to something else. Yep.
Approximately 48 cents.
I'm sorry.
Approximately 48 cents.
To about 48 cents. It's important to point out that it's not a problem now, but it's something that the board, as you look into the future, something that the district's going to have to address in order to service the existing debt service that we have. Just to keep that in mind, as you build next year's budget. Okay.
Okay, are there any questions, board members, comments, or concerns? Mr. Revere?
On the M&O side, we can reduce the appropriations to have revenue put into that. Just as a general question, is there any way to reduce the total appropriations of debt service?
No, I'd say 99.5% of the appropriation is just your interest and principal payments owed on the debt. There's I think, if I remember correctly, there's about $25,000 set up for various fees that we pay the different banks included in that budget, so there's really no way to reduce that.
And how far back would you say the debt goes back to? It's about what year?
As far as issued, or how far out do we have debt?
How far out do we have debt?
Our most recent issue was back in 2010, I believe, was the last actual bond. Generally, they go out 30 years. My assumption is that those debts issued at that time will go out 30 years from 2010.
And what is the oldest debt we were paying back?
I don't have that information. I can get that to you all for the response.
And then, short of increasing the revenue, basically increasing the debt service tax portion, what other avenues do we have to continue to pay this without raising that portion?
Really, there is none. We receive funding from the state on the debt. It's called instructional facility allotment and existing debt allotment. Where we've been hit hardest is on the funding from the state, as well as how we use funding on the general maintenance side with loss of students. The same is true for our debt side. So as we've been losing students, the state has been contributing less towards our outstanding debt, escalating the problem as far as how much we have to raise our tax rate to service the debt.
Thank you.
And to answer your previous question on this year's budget, it was $76,230,000 in revenue, and appropriations was $76,207,000. 207,000.
Let me also point out something in this slide that I think would be important to point out, and that's the amount of money that the state contributes on debt service, on the INS, which is $5 million out of the total $12 million in revenue. Okay? If you're to do the math, that comes out to, I believe, 41%. All right? And some of you heard me say earlier today that the tax rate on the increased tax rate, should the TRE pass, that the state of Texas would cover 65% of what comes in. 65%. Y'all can figure out the math and work it out, but it comes out to right 65%. What I'm trying to point out is that return on the investment is much greater under the TRE than investing local tax dollars or tax rate into the INS. That the return for INS, as far as what the state covers, is 41%, and as far as what the state covers under a TRE and the proposed increase of 17 cents comes out to about 65%. So I think that's an important thing to realize that, because for every penny you invest, you get a greater return under the TRE.
JC, and perhaps in the written answer you provide us with the oldest debt we have, I think it might be a good picture for all of us here as we plan out the future to see what is the cap, so how much more debt are we allowed to issue. I imagine not much more than we currently have, but something within reason, or if the debt service was increased, what's the maximum amount of debt we were able to issue based on that?
So our limitation on issuing new debt is it's called the 50-cent rule. So you gotta have capacity, you can have capacity up to 50 cents of that year as far as existing debt with new debt. So if we're saying that the existing debt is gonna go up, requirement would be 48 cents next year. That leaves us about 2 cents to go up in tax rate as far as advising the voter. The amount of gain is the number that I can come back to with and say, with a 2-cent tax rate increase to the debt side, how much would that raise for us to put into our facility needs? And so I can bring that back to you.
And the total appropriations for the debt, I'm assuming that's going to increase based on some of the interest on those bonds we're still paying back?
As far as the appropriation, yes, sir. So depending on when we pay off debt, and I'll have to look at that. I think we're a few years out before we pay off any debt. But yes, it would continue to rise because our interest and principal will stay about the same, but our interest will continue to grow.
So even though we have a 2-cent capacity, that may just be able to cover existing debt, not even issue new debt.
Correct. Depending on the year we're in.
Right.
The other factors that I didn't point out is that the other side of the formula for debt service is appraised values. So as our wealth goes up, the per student, because they look at it as wealth and student population, the state starts contributing less to the district because we're in an opposite situation where we're losing students and our wealth is going up. So our actual wealth per student goes up, which is a hard dynamic for a district of our needs. So.
Because property values have continued to rise mostly across the whole county, and as we decrease in student enrollment, that ratio is going to be off balance and we'll achieve less revenue from the state.
That's correct. As a matter of fact, the estimate that Jason gave us that it could possibly take 48 cents, I believe is based on the enrollment of what, 8,600 kids?
That is based on the 86 and again, projected evaluations.
Right. But beyond this coming year, this coming fall, if that enrollment continues to drop and values continue to grow, it's very likely that we would exceed even the remaining 2 pennies, most likely.
Potentially.
And the only way the state allows you to go past the 50 cents is increase the tax rate to generate levy to pay the debt service that the voters have approved already. So they've already approved the bonds. So if we have to go to 52 cents, we would be able to do that. Correct. But at that point, you could sell no more new bonds until the law changes and raises the cap beyond 50 cents.
And the taxes will be significantly higher.
Right.
Property taxes.
Yeah. And the only relief, and Jason stated it, is when some of these bonds expire at that point, things, the picture changes again.
But those are typically like a 30-year bond, so that's quite a lot.
Well, but some bonds, I believe, are in the books from the 1990s, I believe. I mean, those are likely to be retired maybe within the next 10 years sometime. I don't know exactly when. We'd have to look at that.
And I'll provide that information.
Yeah.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Are there any other comments, questions, or concerns? No?
Just have one, just to give you
Ms.
that.
Corrado?
You mentioned, Mr. Samora, the IFA fund. Is that something that's been depleted, though? We have no IFA funds, do we?
No, we continue to receive IFA funds. The state has not increased, or the state has not been necessarily funding at the levels they used to fund for new debt, but the existing debt they continue to fund.
We're talking about the instructional facilities allotment. So we aren't getting funds from the state for that?
Yes, ma'am.
How much are we getting?
That number, I'm sure. So for the IFA, we're looking at roughly 2.4 million.
2.4 million. And that's how much you get every year from the state?
Again, it fluctuates because it's based on student enrollment as well as our valuations, so it changes.
And how much are we getting for next year?
That is the projection.
2.4 million?
Yes.
And this 2.4 million can only be used for construction, for facilities,
No, it can only be used to pay debt.
to pay debt as well?
No, only debt.
So only debt?
Only debt.
Okay. But I think at one time, though, they had, the state had granted us instructional facilities allotment that we were able to use for facilities. So I guess that's no longer existing.
No,
You still the bonds, and that, the revenue from the bonds, you would use for facilities.
For facilities.
there used to be and it still may be there used to be an allocation for new facilities allotment, which the state would give every district so much money if you had a brand new facility to sort of help start up cost of the facility. And that came to the district to be able to use to buy desks or what those things were that the district needed. But that's only to open up new campus. So.
Well, we did at one time have those funds, but I'm assuming they've already been depleted, but there's nothing left.
Of the new facilities allotment?
Yes.
Yes, those, they give it to you in the given year, and it's not tracked like it is for, I would say, like state comp or special ed allocation. They basically give it to you in an allocation, and then you use it or you keep it.
And you have to request the allocation, or do they just automatically allocate the money?
There's a form you got to submit to advise them that you have a new facility that they then determine what your allocation is.
Oh, okay, so we can submit a form to request IFA money.
Not IFA, new facility.
New facility,
Yeah.
sorry, okay. And is there a limit? I mean, can we are allowed to request a certain amount only?
Well, you have to be opening a brand new campus.
Okay,
So that's the only way you can apply for that.
and then they may help you with that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's all I have for Mr. Samora. I do have a question for council. I think, Ben, at the last meeting, I had asked you also a question regarding, when we did our last budget presentation, Dr. Samora has, Dr. Samora, I promoted you. Dr. Samora has listed all the proposed cuts for the budget if this TRE does not pass. So my question to you is, once that budget is brought over to the board for us to adopt the budget, at that time, the board does have the authority to, if there are any cuts that are being proposed, to fund those cuts as opposed to cutting them, directing the superintendent to do that and to come up with the money to fund them.
So the board's authority is to approve the budget or not approve the budget. So if there's an area that the board is not satisfied with, you cannot approve, you have the option to not approve that portion and give the superintendent feedback to bring back a budget that will be approved by the board, if that makes sense.
That can fund those cuts if you
Yes.
see it's a program or a function that we really would like to have instead of having it cut.
Yes, in that context, the way that I explained it, yes, but I mean, it's, yes.
Okay. All right. That's all I have. Thank you.
So I need clarification on that. At what level does the board have to, can we go deep into program selection?
So the board approves the budget at the function level. That's been the practice here the last couple of years, and that's the practice all over the state of Texas. But you do have final approval authority. If there's something within a function that maybe there's something that you're not satisfied with, you could just reject the whole function and give feedback to the administration to bring an adequate amount of funding or to decrease funding in that function that will get approved. So it's like a veto power, right, if that makes sense. But as far as kind of going in and saying, I don't approve this program, but I approve this program, no, that's not appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments, questions, or concerns? Okay.
This next slide is just a slide more of a feedback from the board to determine whether or not we will present a 6th budget presentation prior to the budget adoption, and then when we would present the budget to be adopted. We have gotten guidance from the city election office on the canvassing and whether or not we want to present a budget before the canvassing or not is also part of the feedback from the board that
And JC, what did they say, the canvassing, what's the appropriate time for that?
it's 6 days from the date that they received the last ballots, which I think is the day after the election. Possible.
So do you know that date?
No. So it would have to be 7 days from August 14th.
So it would be,
It would be
Tuesday the 21st.
so you're proposing on that day to adopt the district budget,
we had talked about the Wednesday.
Yeah, we talked about the next day.
the 22nd?
Second.
You can't do it earlier than Tuesday the 21st.
Okay. And then, so your question to the board is if we're wanting to have a number 6 workshop? And when do you foresee that one happening, if we decide to?
It would only make sense to have a workshop after the election, because I really couldn't change any information without knowing if the TRE passes. And again, even that information wouldn't change except for the functional level, where I would incorporate the compensation within the functions as appropriate.
Okay, so we have a meeting scheduled on August the 15th. Is that too soon?
Probably.
Okay. All right, board members, so you've heard their comments, and is that something we decide now, or?
Now for you.
Yes.
My suggestion to the board would be that the board schedule a budget workshop with discussion and possible action on Wednesday the 22nd, so that basically the whole budget is presented to you. And if the board is ready, or majority of the board is ready to adopt the budget that night, you get the opportunity to someone make a motion and get a second and get it passed. If in fact there is not a majority of the board willing to adopt whatever budget is presented at that time, then leave it as a workshop that day, and at that time schedule maybe a week later, which would be the 29th. I think we have to August 31st. So you could come back the following Wednesday and adopt it, or maybe even, we could do the next night if you need 3 days to post. But anytime the following week, that Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday the following week. I mean, that would work, you know, just.
Okay.
I'm in agreement. I kind of favor the 22nd workshop with discussion, possible action.
I think
We'll
that's,
still have the 15th as well, 15th and 22nd.
Yes, the 15th is our regular called meeting,
Right.
and then the 22nd will be our special called for August.
Yeah, I'd like to have the workshop, so if I can accommodate it, I think that'd be great.
Okay.
The election on the 14th, then?
Yes,
So we could cancel the vote on the 22nd.
yes, we could still, well, we can do it, yeah, we could do it the 22nd, yes, that's what, yes,
So that means the 7-day term.
yes. Yeah, we could canvass and then present the budget workshop for and adopt the budget.
Okay. Are there any other questions or concerns? We can move to the next report. It's a report on LSG Superintendent Constraint 2.3, SSAISD Teacher Support Plan to improve teacher efficiency and increase student outcomes. Dr. Saavedra.
yes, ma'am, I'm gonna call on Ms. Castro as well as Ms. De Leon to make this presentation.
Dr. Saavedra, Madam President, members of the board. Tonight we are presenting out on the superintendent constraint progress measure. The constraint itself is the superintendent will not allow any campuses to have inequitable access to effective staff. Under that is 2.3, and that's what we are scheduled to present, is administration will develop a clear, defined improvement plan detailing explicit support measures for teachers who need additional assistance by 2017-18. So today we're going to present that. I know everyone has received this a week ago, and so I'm going to turn it over to Ms. De Leon for her to walk us through the presentation. Ms. De Leon?
Good evening, board members. In order to make certain that our students are seated in high-quality seats, the Division of Academics has developed and implemented a teacher support plan that directly aligns to Superintendent Constraint 2.3. So as you know, there are many factors that contribute to student success. However, research does indicate that teachers matter the most. In fact, a teacher, with regard to reading and math, a teacher is estimated to have 2 to 3 times greater impact over any other factor within or outside of the school system. And since 2014 and 15, the Division of Academics has been focused on coaching principals, assistant principals, instructional coaches on how to deliver what we call bite-sized or granular feedback to teachers so they can improve practices immediately when they return back to their classrooms. So you have, and I have extra copies of the backup of the teacher support plan. Does everybody have theirs? Is that fine? Okay. So as you can see, we have the teacher support plan. As you can see from the timeline, teachers are identified, prior teachers are identified as early as September. Our goal is to provide immediate support to these teachers as our students cannot afford one day of ineffective teaching. And furthermore, we are committed to the growth and success of every teacher. And I'd like to go into the next slide that goes into more specificity of the cycle that we actually implement. This is something that, again, we have been working with principals consistently for 4 years. And we are proud of this plan. We feel that we have significantly had an impact on teachers. Our fundamental belief is that the teacher is the program. Therefore, our main priority is that we support the growth of every teacher across the district in all of our classrooms. And we do this by conducting walkthroughs. So we do require that our principals and assistant principals conduct at minimum 3 walkthroughs a semester for every teacher. And it is through these classroom observations that we identify teachers that may need more assistance, that may need more specific strategies, that they may need to develop those strategies to engage students better. Okay, after we conduct the walkthroughs, we then follow with an immediate face-to-face feedback. We ask principals to conduct this within 24 hours. So we go into the classrooms and we meet with the teachers one-on-one, and we provide, again, that granular feedback. We'll have a review of what we saw specifically, and then we have really coached up our principals to be able to give them a strategy that, again, they can go back and immediately implement at the next class period, whether it's secondary or the next day. But most importantly, we don't leave it there. We also request the support of instructional coaches. We go back in after we've given that bite-sized feedback, whether it might be an instructional coach, an assistant principal, or a principal. We'll go back to the classroom because we want to make certain that there is follow-up, that the teacher, in fact, is implementing that best practice that was suggested. And so once we go back into the classrooms and we do determine that the teacher has had success, the teacher begins to consistently implement those strategies, we identify another area of focus and the process begins all over again. Are there any questions for myself or Ms. Casa?
Board members, the floor is open. Mrs. Flores and Mr. Munguia.
Yes, Ms. De Leon, on the previous slide where you have the timeline, for this one, yes. The implementation date of September the 30th, the steps are priority teachers identified from previous T-test evaluations. So what's the process with a brand new teacher that does not have a T-test evaluation?
So brand new teachers, that's one thing. They are on everyone's radar, and that's something that we articulate with the principals and instructional coaches. We go into those classrooms immediately. In fact, we ask principals to meet with those teachers regularly. Say there's 6 teachers on staff, check on them once a week. You have a little huddle with them, meet with them, even then give them a mini PD. We might bring in those new 6 teachers and offer them a strategy, and then go back to, check on that implementation.
And so to further answer your question, everyone receives walkthroughs starting the first day of school.
Okay.
So those new teachers would receive walkthroughs if they did not have previous evaluation. And based on those walkthroughs, we do not encourage any teacher going on an intervention plan without 4 walkthroughs and 4 face-to-face feedback. If they don't, and teachers know that they have to get their it has to be face-to-face, it can't be over email. If the principal blows off a teacher, let's say, and within, then that walkthrough does not count.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Munguia.
What do you look for on a walkthrough?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Every year, in the 4 years we've been here, we always had an instructional focus that builds on the previous year. I'm a big believer in, I do not like bringing new stuff because it's new. I'm very, I don't know if you want to call it old school, but I would like doing things well. I don't think, as a teacher, I didn't like more new things every new year. Oh, we're going to do this new thing. It's, the strategies, good practices have been the same pretty much for many years, even the years when I used to teach. So when you say what we look for, the first thing we look for is what's the goal of the lesson, which is the lesson objective. How do we know students know what the goal of the lesson is? Is it posted? Maybe it's not posted, maybe it's written on their journals. Maybe you ask a student, hey, what's the goal for today? Oh, we're supposed to be learning slope and intercept. Oh, okay, thank you. So the first thing we look for is what's the objective of the lesson. Normally, the second thing we look for is there a posted demonstration of learning? Meaning we have the goal of the lesson, and then our students very clear on what they're supposed to demonstrate that they did achieve the goal, or that they didn't achieve the goal. So we always, what's the DL post? And so a DOL, we call it demonstration of learning, would be maybe using, I'm pulling this out of the air, using 5 star-related questions over slope-intercept form. Students are expected to get 3 of the 5 correct. Let's say they would ask 3 of the 5 because let's say it's a new, a new introduction, maybe not all 5. But if it's something they've been doing, then they would expect 4 out of 5. They always give a target. They give a measurement for kids so they know what the expectation is. So those 2 things, and then within the 10 minutes that we're there, 10 to 12 minutes, we should see some form of a multiple response strategy. And what that is where students are sharing with their teacher an immediate formative assessment. That could be using whiteboards. So teachers could be, let's say they do 2 slides of notes. Okay, students, get out your whiteboards, meet with your partner and identify 2 facts of what I just taught. So they do the 3, 2, 1, go, and they show that's an idea of them, a response strategy where teachers can, there's also thumbs up, there is turn and talk and share out. So we look at some sort of engagement activity within those 12 minutes. Now what happens is, and this is why it's important to have face-to-face feedback, have their lesson plans. They're kids, things change. And so let's say within that 15 minutes, or we didn't see a multiple response strategy. So it's imperative that teacher meets with that principal, that principal meets with that teacher to give the face-to-face feedback. And that's where that teacher says, Ms. Castro, before you walked in, it took a little longer. Let's say notes took a little longer, something took a little longer, I couldn't get to the one. Oh, okay, no problem. I'm gonna come back tomorrow then, and let's see it. I'd like to see kids interactive. Do you see what I mean? And so that's why it's important to have the face-to-face. So therefore, teachers can share with their principal, because I'm always about, they need to respond to where the kids are learning. I know we have a lesson plan and we follow a lesson plan, but kids may go this way as a response, and then you've got to meet those kids there. So, that's a real quick, down and dirty kind of what we look for in classrooms.
Great. Second question is, what is the consequence when principals or teachers do not comply with a number of walkthroughs or provide feedback?
They're written up by, the principals are written up by me.
And what if a teacher does not comply with these things you
If the teacher refuses to meet with the principal, then that's up to the principal on how they want to document. But it's hard, and that's where we get into the intervention plan, where it's very detailed, saying, let's say that intervention plan states, I had these 3 walkthroughs, I attempted to meet with you, we agreed on this time, and you didn't show up, That, it's hard for us, and especially as we bring non-renewals to you, if a teacher isn't getting feedback and refuses to get feedback, well then, South San may not be the district for them.
And we do, Ms. Castro does an extensive training with principals on documentation. So we will start with letters of concerns, and then if we have to proceed to letters of reprimand, we do go that way if necessary.
Thank you for the thorough and concise answer. Appreciate it.
Okay, board members, are there any other comments, questions, or concerns?
I just have a question.
Mrs. Bell?
So the timeline that you have here, and I noticed at the very end, starting in February for next year, this will determine whether or not a teacher will be renewed or not renewed.
Correct.
Is there anything else that is used as a tool to determine whether they're successful or not besides this?
If they violate policy, if they do something egregious, like if there's other rules. This is non-renewal due to performance, but teachers might.
Insubordination.
Insubordination. There's other things that's outside of performance that they could be non-renewed. I believe it's DE local that identifies the areas of how, the reasons for non-renewal.
And does attendance have a place in here, whether they're consistent in their attendance or not?
It can be, because I believe and I need to pull up the policy, but it does state that excessive attendance is a reason for non-renewal. That's in our local policy. But we can't, we need to be fair. Obviously, our kids are our first priority, but we also need to be fair to our employees. So teachers get 10 days, 5 state, 5 local. If a teacher starts getting at the 7th or 6th absence, that's almost exceeding their 10 days, hey, let's meet with that teacher. First we always say, is there something happening? Is there something going on? Is there, something I need to, identify? Because let's say, and I know we've had this in the past where a teacher at the last minute doesn't call in, so there's not a sub. Therefore, those classes have to be split amongst your colleagues. And so it's always conversation before paper is what we encourage. Have that face-to-face. You don't know what's going on with that teacher. Let's go with the benefit and the most positive presupposition first and identify, is there something happening? And After that conversation, they document that, we've met with this, and if it continues to happen, then it goes into a letter of concern. We met with you on this, continues to happen. And then if it exceeds that, then as long as we're giving, identifying a pattern of, and telling that teacher, this is now a pattern that could be considered excessive absences. I'm trying to remember if we've had a non-renewal for that. Have we had that? Okay. It never got, yeah. And so something I do want to point out is I don't think in the past 3 years, I think our first year, but in the past 3 years, the grievance process has not gone beyond, as far as non-renewals, has gone beyond level 2. If you notice, the other thing that we encourage is this should not be a shock to teachers. I do not want, surprise, you're being non-renewed. They should know, but that's why we're very diligent of, hey, you got a letter of concern, they met with you here, you didn't respond to feedback, the instructional coach work, it should not be a surprise when they are notified that they're going to, or recommended for non-renewal. So that's why, if you notice, we haven't non-renewals when we review our documentation with legal. And then, Ben has complimented our principals on how well the documentation is. It shows efforts of support for that teacher, and we encourage, I just want them to be fair to the employees. And so that's why, if you've noticed, we really haven't had, I don't think any that's gone to level 3 regarding their non-renewal because of the documentation we've done and the support we've provided our teachers.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question. I know that this plan was thought out, and I thank you for that. When do we anticipate to start using it? I know in the progress measures it said 2017 and 2018. So I don't know if this plan was.
We've been using this since I got here.
Oh, okay.
We just we never put it presented it to the board, but when I do
That was my question, because I know we were doing something.
Yes. We just never presented it to the board. When I do my documentation training with the principals and assistant principals during the administrative boot camp, these are the timelines we follow. And so we just never presented it to the board.
Okay, good. And so I wanted to get a clarifying response. Mr. Munguia said, what is the consequence of a principal who doesn't do walkthroughs? I know you said that you write them up.
They're not, yeah.
And so what does the write-up entail? What does it lead to?
If they don't have, but they need to have 3 walkthroughs per teacher by first semester, and then 3 walkthroughs per teacher for second semester. Now, it all depends, to be honest with you. Some principals, they had, let's say, they had a really, 5 really low performing teachers. They spent more of their time in those classrooms, so they may have had 10, 14, or 15 walkthroughs on those teachers. So maybe the PE teacher only got 2. Before, again, conversation before paper, and we notify this one. We check Educatory, we check, what they're putting out there. We meet with the principals, so it's not a shock to them either, or me. And they'll say, Ms. Castro, I'm living in these 5, classrooms. I can't get, and so we'll negotiate. Hey, I get it. 5th grade, these 2 in 5th grade math, 2nd grade read. That's more the priority than hitting, 3 for that PE teacher. But if it's insubordination, then, we'll take appropriate action and notify Dr. Saavedra eventually.
And really, the last 3 years, it's not been a problem. The first year or 2, we had a few challenges.
Yep.
And we dealt with them, we documented them, it was reflected in their evaluations. But things got a lot better after the second year, a lot better.
Yes.
Nowadays, if the principal falls behind, it's only because of the overload that they have.
Right.
And so we work with them.
Right. Sometimes it's like an assistant principal goes on at the Malay. There's other, so it's always a conversation before paper. But Dr. Feather is right. Our first year we had some challenges, but since then we've not had challenges.
So then my other question is, so we know the recommendations for non-renewal. What is in place to, or clarify on the way, the process that we do this? What guarantees, or what do we do for the the teachers that are exemplary? As far as, I know contracts go out, or are they hired for indefinite, or is it a year to year,
It's-
or how does that look, and what time frame do we inform them that they're exemplary, and that you have a future with this next year? How does that work?
Let me speak to it. First of all the teacher contracts are year to year. And we've not implemented, I guess, an extended contract for exemplary teachers. Nothing keeps us from doing that, don't get me wrong. There's something that maybe the district should consider at some point in the future. But the feedback they get really is at the evaluation time. When they meet with their principal face to face and they receive feedback from the principal and so forth. And that's how they're told you're exemplary. Principals actually walk through the teacher data with them.
Right.
And so really the positive strokes come at the campus level. The idea that superb teachers might get extended contracts is not a bad idea.
Something that I'm actually, that AFT has brought to our attention is maybe when they get exemplary, they don't have to get formally evaluated every year, it could be every other year, but they would still get walkthroughs. I know some, interestingly enough, when we first got here, our high-flying teachers, the exemplary ones, when I got here, this was the first time some of them had walkthroughs or feedback in several years, because principals were like, you're good, you're fine, I don't need to worry about you. But they need growth too, and their feedback to me was, I want to get better. And you know how those hungry teachers are, they're like, they want to get better, they never stop learning. And so something I know AFT has brought to us is maybe if they continue to have walkthroughs, but maybe the formal evaluation can be every other year, every 2, something like that. So that has been in discussion and consultation for us to consider something like that, where if they have scored, in the exemplary area, in the accomplished area, to consider that.
I'm glad that y'all are looking at that.
Yeah.
It almost falls under I believe, the attention. I know that we have a plan, I'm glad it's clear and defined for the board, but also on the flip side, we want to exemplify that we're transformative and that we want to recognize and acknowledge our exemplary. And AFT, that recommendation seems pretty good,
So
that we don't stop providing them growth by going through the walkthroughs,
Right.
but that
The
formative.
formative way, right, and that's and then even, something that I've been looking at, we haven't had consultation in a minute, so like Tom doesn't know this, but something I've been looking at is other districts, they have parameters in place where a new principal starts, then everybody goes back to 0. You know what I mean, things like that. So we would have parameters in place in case, because I do know something that we need to be careful of too, and I know I bet you Ms. Flores knows what I'm going to say, is we'll have a low-performing school, but the teachers are rated exemplary, and that's not right. In fact, that happened at R2 at Armstrong and Dwight when we started looking at the alignment of their evaluations. Well, no one was telling them they needed improvement, if anything, and they were on PDOS. It said not just proficient, exemplary, and now the state is saying they have to be reconstituted. So we have to be careful with that too. That it's calibrated feedback, and that's something that we worked for many years in defining what is an excellent classroom, what does it look like, which is what our strategic design leads into, our learner profile. So that's something that we're always continuing to do and make sure our principals, teachers, everyone is clear on what excellence is in the classroom.
Good. Okay. First round, Mr. Mulia.
So you're telling me that you and Tom agreed on something?
5 years.
He wants 5 years, I want 2 years.
My question is, and this is really great information, I'm glad this is happening, and we're trying to catch these things early on. So, can you explain to me what happened before you started here, and what did these types of things look like?
I don't understand.
Before you started, so we're having this consistent walkthrough and interventions and all that. What did that look like before you came here? Was it non-existent?
I,
I think it varied from principal to principal.
right,
So it was, I mean, I think you had them in some schools.
that were, yeah.
Probably did not have them at all in others. You had a few in some others. I mean, it just varied, you know, from what I can recall.
Yes.
So they happened, well, they weren't district-wide, they weren't consistent?
It wasn't an expectation
Okay.
that everyone, I mean, if we're in front of kids, everyone needs to get feedback on how they're doing. And so, yeah, that's correct. Mhm.
All right. Okay, so moving on to the next. Okay, board members, we're at the hour. Mr. Iwata is still not here. I will entertain the consent, and then whether he's here or not, go into closed executive session. Do we have any objections to that? Okay, so we're now on the consent, and policy BE Loco states that the consent agenda shall include items of a routine and recurring nature grouped together under one action item. All such items shall be acted upon by one vote without separate discussion unless a board member requests that an item be withdrawn for individual consideration. The remaining items shall be adopted under a single motion and vote. So number one is approval of board meeting minutes, time management log, and board tracker. A, special call June 6th. B, regular call June 20th. Number two, to approve resolution for schools and libraries universal services, E-rate for 2018-19. 3, approve the interagency agreement for the school health and related services program. 4, approve the Head Start self-assessment for the fiscal year 2017. 5, approval of Express Script Incorporated Pharmacy Benefit Management Agreement. 6, approve the purchase of food and non-food items for the 2018 school year. Approve the renewal of the maintenance and service agreement with Reliance Air and Refrigeration for child nutrition kitchen equipment for the 2018-19 school year. 8, approve the purchase of produce for the 2018-19 school year utilizing the renewal of RFQ 2017-09. 9, approve the service agreement with SFS PAC for the 2018-19 school year not to exceed $32,000. 10, approval of district self-funded excess workers' compensation insurance. 11, approval of Texas Association of School Boards property and casualty insurance. So are there any board members who want to pull out any of the consent items?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion that we approve consent items 1 through 11.
Okay, a motion has been made by Mrs. Prado. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second has been made by Mr. Munguia. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion carries. And Mr. Ibarra is now here. His entrance was at 7:04. So we're now going to closed session. The board will return to open session and take appropriate action, if any, on items discussed in closed session. No action will be taken in closed session. Further, board members are reminded that all items discussed in closed session must remain confidential so as to avoid liability to the district. The board will consider and discuss the following items. Closed meeting pursuant to the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code 551.071, 551.072, 551.074, 551.076, 551.082, and 551.0821. Number 1, discussion concerning personnel matters pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074. Number 2, discussion on superintendent search pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.071 and 551.074. And the time is 7:05 p.m.
Good, how are you? Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay, we are back from closed session. The time is 8:21 p.m. And we are discussion possible action number 1. Discussion and possible action to approve the quarterly progress tracker LSG. All right, so this is led by me. And there was supporting documentation to the board meetings. And, okay, and so on Vision 1, we did indicate from the April 18th meeting that we were adding number 12. And we said that we wanted to target the number 15. And so in reviewing that, and if you have your Lone Star Governance Manual, that begins on page 40, and it's also on your screen. Okay, so we said we were adding 12. And so do we still feel we're adding 12, or are we at the 15? So go ahead and read the paragraphs under 12. This is page 40 of your Lone Star Governance.
It says about board members, so we've got to making sure that we're all being trained on.
Well, there's not necessarily a training, only that the vision has been posted. The student outcome goals have been in effect for a year. To memory and know at all times the current status of each student outcome goal. So I don't think that pertains to training.
Are you talking about 12 or
talking about 15. Where on 12 is there all?
All board members can agree with the student outcome goals about all SMART. Students will challenge the organization and be part of behavior change.
Okay, so tell me why you feel that doesn't relate to us.
And I don't mean to point Mr. Rodriguez, but he hasn't been through the two-day training or he has you been to the two-day training yet for
The 566?
Lone Star Governance? About, so that you're familiar with the SMART, outcome goals that are SMART, and you're familiar with the adult behavior change?
What I've read on that workbook, just when
Okay, so let me pose a question to you, Mr. Rodriguez.
Sure.
Do you feel that our student outcome goals that the board has outlined, are they SMART? Are they specific, measurable, attainable, result-focused, and time-bound?
From all the meetings that I've been attending and all the design programs and things that have been in place, yeah, I do believe they are.
Okay.
And as far as the LSG, since I was going through my challenge at that time, I did download the workbook at that time, and then I got a hard copy of it later on too, so I didn't have the benefit of the note-taking of being there, unfortunately. You know, but that's still to come. I'm still working on getting
I
there.
know it's coming, but I'm just stuck with the all board member piece on that one, that's all.
So you self-educated yourself?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, it's constantly learning. You can't stop. It's always learning something, especially for something like
That counts
this.
for something.
Okay, board members, so based on the input Mrs. Flores gave, do you feel we're at the 12, or if that particular portion is questionable, then that puts us at the 4?
What would AJ say?
What do you say? I think based on this specific language, I think questioning Mr. Rodriguez and him answering, saying that he believes that they are SMART, I don't think he needs training in knowing what SMART is, especially that it has the description there. That's for me. I mean, what do you say?
It's just that so much of our training at the beginning, I'd say half the day part was about required adult behavior change. And the way it was
So
presented,
you want him to be able to
experience that part.
Well, okay. If I can say something.
Uh-huh.
Again, I've been part of some of the design measurements that have gone on, even as recently as yesterday, and other trainings that staff has held. It's been a quick learning experience for me, but something that I have absorbed. You know, I think even though I haven't gone to that yet, I think I've gotten the gist of it, at least, you know, if you will.
It's just the questions that
No,
are posed by the presenters.
I understand.
And it threw us all for a loop when we attended and we felt, oh, okay, so that's, you know what I'm saying?
Right, no, it's more clarity when you go to something. I understand that. That's why I said I've got the workbook, but I missed out on the benefit of actually having to be there and take the notes and do all that.
Design.
Right, yeah, and I understand that part of it.
the interaction with the presenters
Right.
and the way he puts you in the small groups and makes you
Yeah.
actually utilize some of the stuff that you're talking about in small groups.
Right.
I think that's what she's talking about.
Yeah, I understand, but at the same time, I haven't been sitting idly by.
I don't think we're saying that.
I'm just saying, I'm just trying to say that, you know, I have been proactive in doing some of this. Now, it hasn't been exactly that, I will admit, because I missed that. And I had the opportunity to go in, what was it, June, I think, but then they canceled that one.
No, it's really not your fault. I'm just saying, at
No,
this point in time,
Mr. Rodriguez, were you on the board April 18th?
Yes.
Okay, so on April 18th, we said that he sufficed that measurement. So if you're questioning it now, then we're at a 4.
Okay, then we, because it just says all, I'm sorry, but it just says all board members agree, all board members and the superintendent agree.
Agree.
If you look at your board packet, I don't know what page it is, but 51 on your board packet is what I'm looking, trying to refer to. Second page under that title, you can see what we gave ourselves on the 18th. So we gave ourselves a 12. And so if we gave ourselves a 12, with Mr. Rodriguez being on the board, we determined that it sufficed. And so what's questionable is the next segment. Now, well, what is questionable is, are we at a 12 still, or do we revert to the 4, or have we made progress and are we at the 15? Now, what I can say about the first paragraph in 15 is we did visit the Lone Star Government Goes. Ms. Gassner, don't leave me. We initiated the reevaluation of the strategic design. When was that done?
When did we do that? That was, February?
No, more recent.
Like yesterday?
Not as recent as yesterday, but
But in
when,
February, March, and then our final one was April, I think, that elected as school performance framework, Lone Star governance goals aligning with our.
okay, so in April, we couldn't sufficiently say that we had invited the community, students and families to the new vision because we were working on it. But I can say today that we did it. We got input from students, families, teachers, and community members. They were involved in the vision. That's why it got tweaked, and that has happened. They also looked at the student outcome goals in the development process. So we did suffice the first paragraph. The second one is what we need to look at. All board members have committed the vision and student outcome goals to memory and know at all times the current status of each student outcome goal. That's where I'm questioning. So I think if we have to suffice both paragraphs in order to give ourselves a 15. If not, then we're still at a 12. Do I get some agreement in that? Or are we still questioning the 12?
No, you could basically say 12. I mean, we're at 12, but I don't know what.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can tell you I don't have everything memorized for the second paragraph. I cannot be at the 15. And I'm glad, Dylan, you help. We need it.
No, I'm just saying we are done.
If we, yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, no question.
And I'm glad that Delinda and the administration has helped us get the first paragraph. And so all those folks that were involved, was that for the strategic design?
Well, it's considered the strategic design, but it was the process. So this second round, the initial process started 4 years ago, I believe, Dr. Saavedra?
Yes, ma'am.
And so I intently asked staff to revisit to see if there is a cohesive alignment between the strategic design strategies, the Lone Star governance goals, and then most currently, which was yesterday, we incorporated the SGS model. And so aligning those three factions have created what we'll be bringing up to the board next month. So there'll be some revisions. But in that process, I wanted to incorporate the students, the families, the teachers, and community members to visit what it is current and where we can tweak.
Okay, so there wasn't like one meeting where that all happened, it was a series?
It was a
of meetings.
series,
Okay.
and it was developed with several focus groups
Okay.
and dwindled down.
Now, I did unfortunately have to miss a workshop meeting, I think maybe 1 or 2 months ago. And what was that?
It was in reference to that.
Okay,
Yeah, that was this.
and at that meeting, did we have, just a general question, folks from outside the school participating? Okay.
Outside the school being who?
Like, not hired by the school, not.
Yes, so we had outside partners. We had families, we had students,
Business,
business community.
Yeah, and then I wish I could have gone to that. And I know a few years back, I was invited to the Palo Alto Strategic Design meeting, where they had, something like we had yesterday, but they also had, council staff and other stakeholders there. So, yeah, as much as we can do that, in the future, I know we have in the past, that's great. So,
Okay.
just kudos to y'all for coming up with that.
Anyone else want to mention anything? So where do you see us at? 15, 12? 12, okay. So Vision 1, we are at number 12. Do we project to be at a 15? And the next self-evaluation is October. Or do we project to stay at a 12?
I think we can get to the 15 because,
Let me put some pushback there. Just know that they're going to change in August.
that's what I was gonna say, so.
And so we would give ourselves roughly 8 weeks to commit this to memory. Good. I say still at 12 as well. All right. Okay, so the next one is Vision 2. Page 41. We gave ourselves a 4, and we projected a target of 15. So read 4 and see if we're still there. And then read 12 to see if we've mastered that.
I think it was last year 12.
I would say that each one of us needs to answer number, if each one of us, because it asks all board members agree, so do each one of us agree that we're at 12?
Or do each one of us agree that the goal progress measures
Are all
are?
predictive of the perspective, yeah, do we agree on that, each one of us?
And the other thing is, I think the timing's a little awkward because yesterday we amended or provided some suggestions that change some of these goal progress measures.
Okay.
But at
so
this point in time.
yes, at this point, what we're reviewing is April, May, and June. So what was posted and what we were outlining and using for April, May, and June, is this relevant to that? And so we were at a 4. I believe we've mastered the 12, because I agree that the GPMs are all predictive of their respective student outcome goals, and they were influenced by the superintendent. Predictive does suggest that there is some evidence of a correlation between the progress measure and the goal. Influenceable suggests that the superintendent had authority over roughly 80% of whatever the progress measure is measuring. The superintendent, that would be his agreement. And I think we're even at the masters because we did go over these in our strategic design in May, correct?
Was there a broad acceptance of the people at the strategic design of our goals? I don't know that we've had enough community meetings outside board-led to really present goals and really kind of get a sense of the overall.
Now, there is another section for that. This is not saying board-led.
No, I know that. I'm just saying it says community members were involved in the GPM development process.
They were split into groups.
Yep.
On those groups, they had to go through the learner profile to see if that was, if it was aligned. It was very detailed.
And they had, I want to say they split up each board goal, like each table had a goal, and they had to identify in the current strategic design, will this get us to our goal? If it doesn't, what do we need to add to it so we can get it to our goal? What do we need to streamline? So some things were streamlined, that's why they updated the vision, and things like that, so it would take us to achieve the 3 goals. So that work was done.
Delinda, do you know roughly how many individuals participated? Or what was the average? 'Cause I know you held several meetings.
No, but on the last 2 days, because we ran out of chairs, we had to get an extra table. I want to say like between 40 and 50. We can get the sign-in sheets, but between 40 and 50. And I know one day, like we may have.
Representatives like that were kind of recommended by principals at the campuses and stuff?
Some were based on when.
It was a call out, so
Right.
you were called out to a focus group.
Right,
And
some
then based on
in
the
the focus group,
there
you
was
met with engaged.
additional meetings,
Right.
and if you were available, you were given that schedule and to show up, and some did.
And it was, and if there was like a community member, because there was one that, I know a couple that the facilitator said, hey, you need to bring them back for the strategic design part. Like they need to come, make sure, see what we can do to make sure they get back. And so like they actually also like reached out to certain constituents saying, please, you know what I mean? Not just principal,
And the
young
meetings were
principal,
posted.
parent, everything.
They were posted because
Right.
just in case more than 4 board members were in attendance.
But then I think we probably are at master's focus.
I say too. Anyone else disagrees? Okay, so I say we're at a 15 for Vision 2. Now, the projection is to stay there, but I am going to caution on number 4, where it says, the board has adopted an annual target. I know yesterday, that was one of the things that was lacking in presentation was that annual target. I think we said a percentage point was going to be increased every year. If we can outline that to say specifically for this
What
year,
our
it's going to be
annual
this
target is,
amount,
right.
this year, this
And
amount.
I went back and checked, we do have annual targets for the reading and math. We did not put them in for goal 1, which was the college readiness one, for this, like the current one. Because I don't know if you remember, like if you, right, it's like the little, I just pulled it up and now, of course. Hang on,
Yeah, 1.1, it says graduation rate will increase from 88 to 90 by 2018. So
Okay,
the limit says to just that year,
okay,
but we revisit it to say what it is going to be within the next, I think we said 2022 yesterday. And so if we said a percentage point increase
correct.
was,
And and you're
I think we
correct.
said 1%.
1% or
Over the 4 years, so he was going to see what it was incrementally.
That's right. So I guess in every goal, we do have annual targets. I just remember, and I don't know why I don't see it, but I remember having a table.
I know, I don't know where it went.
Where did it go? Right, I remember a table saying, like by 2017, 2018, 2019, okay. So
Yeah, because
I know-
we visited that.
Yeah, I know we have that and that was agreed upon, but I don't see it, so.
And then what my caution was that these goals were going to be ending. And so we
Right.
needed.
But we did have, do you remember those tables that?
I
said-
do.
Okay, so.
Okay, I don't know what happened.
We'll fix it.
All right, so Vision 2, we gave ourselves a 15, and we are working to maintain that 15 for the next quarter. Vision 3. So we stated we were at a 3, and we projected a 10. So read 3, see if we're still there. See if we've met 9. So here I have a question, Dr. Salido, if you could help me. On that second paragraph, it says, separate from the constraints on the superintendent's authority, the board has adopted 3 to 5 self-constraints, and we have, on its own behavior and self-evaluates against one of them each month. So in April, May, and June, did we cover board constraint, any one of them,
I don't.
each month?
Not each.
I didn't see it in the calendar.
I don't think each month.
Okay.
We did one today, but we did not do one every month.
No, today was not a board constraint. Today
Oh,
was
board
a
constraint.
superintendent
I'm sorry.
constraint.
A board constraint?
I don't think we've been
Okay.
not every month.
And so
Not every month.
that was something I emailed, that we
Right.
gotta put it every month to affect the AE local.
So the four board constraints,
We have to discuss them every month.
every month, along with whatever data that's assigned that month.
Yes,
So we're still at a 3.
so we're still at a 3. All right. So do we project a 9 or a 10? I think if we make the changes monthly and, shoot, I'm thinking ahead, we do have a meeting, a special called meeting on Monday. So to suffice July's public meeting, can we put a board constraint on the agenda?
Sure.
Board members?
Sure.
To suffice this month, because then we would be out of compliance for October. Okay?
We'll be close to that tomorrow.
Yes. Okay. And, okay, so we look ahead to the 10.
I think the last paragraph where it says community members were involved in the vision and constraint development process.
And I'm going to get you there because that was discussed yesterday. And so yesterday we went over constraints. And there is some major, well, at least one was some major changes.
Right, and that was from our strategic design, when they started holding the constraints, looking at them and what it says here, and where the constraints, all of the constraints on the superintendent directly related to achieving each of the board goals.
And community input.
And right, with that
the
order.
student learner.
Right, and so that's where we got feedback that we need the constraints need to be more aligned towards the achieving the board goals.
And so I think we would be at a 10 come October.
That should
Y'all
be-
agree with me?
Yeah.
So current 3, and we project a 10.
So are those constraints the superintendent's constraints?
Yeah.
Correct.
Am I reading it to say board's vision and constraints?
Oh. That is, yeah. The
Board
board's
constraints.
vision and constraints.
It doesn't say board constraints, so it leads me to believe superintendent constraints.
That it has
Because
board.
the board
collaborations.
sets their own constraints. I think,
But the vision is the board has adopted the vision.
Uh-huh.
So everything in reference is to the board.
yes, but under constraints, there's the superintendent's constraints that we get community input for. And the board constraints, I think we set those constraints on ourselves. I don't know.
Probably communication to communities would be expected, but I don't know if it's about.
But that's in another segment on unity, it's in there.
But, I mean, going to what Ms. Flores stated, it does say at the end, the community acceptance of the board's vision and constraints. Is that
Are
all?
they saying board constraints and
Vision.
superintendent constraints?
Or just the board constraints?
Just as board.
Or both constraints?
It says board's vision and constraint.
Maybe we need more clarification on that.
I would
Just look at number 9. the second paragraph says, separate from the constraints on the superintendent's authority, the board has adopted 3 to 5 self-constraints on its own behavior and self-evaluates against one of them each month. So
That's on
it
the
leads
board.
me to believe that the community acceptance is for the superintendent's constraints. That's me, that's my personal opinion.
If you read number 1, everything there references the board's constraints, the board's vision, and it looks like everything is pretty much towards the board and their constraints and their visions. So I'm thinking this is the board's vision and constraints.
Because that's the whole title of Vision 3.
Correct. The board has adopted a vision statement. Adopted.
I think it is board.
And it says the board has adopted, I'm sorry, I can't read. The board has adopted a vision for what student outcomes will be and has adopted constraints aligned with that vision, the board.
Yeah, it's.
Okay, but you look at approaches, each constraint describes a single operational action or class of actions the superintendent
Right, okay.
may not use or allow. It doesn't say the board.
Right, but in the one that Ms. Prado brought up, the
I think
board
it's
has
relevant to the-
adopted board constraints. The board, so the board owned the constraint development process
Can
in
we,
collaboration.
Well, you know what? The board has adopted constraints. We were just supposed to put constraints up with, when we did goals. So there was goals, there was constraints.
Okay, so in the meets focus, preparing to focus, does not meet focus, preparing to focus, approaches focus, to me, I believe that that is setting constraints on the superintendent. Once we did that, then on meets focus, then on the second paragraph, the board has adopted 3 to 5 self-constraints on its own behavior. So once you set the constraints on the superintendent, then the next to meet focus is to set constraints on yourself. So the question is, on the master focus, as a board, we don't need clarification, we get clarification from ourselves. Do we want it to say both superintendent and board constraints? Up
Both.
to us. So Ms. Ribada said both. Ms. Flores, what's the yes?
Can we modify this?
It's,
Modify this master
we're
focus?
self-evaluating ourselves. It's only questioning our, to include board constraints or not to include board constraints.
I would like a clarification from those that gave us the training what that means.
So the email.
We can send an email to
I'd
Vlada.
like to, I think what you just said is the board self-evaluation of ourselves.
That's what I say, we make
This
it.
is the board's constraint, the board's vision.
Vision and constraints, that's the way I read it.
So Ms. Prado, you're saying that that last statement should say board constraints and superintendent's constraints.
No, just the board, not the superintendent. I think all of this, vision number 3, is focused on the board and their constraints and their vision. Now, I understand they put something on there about the superintendent may not use or allow, so forth, so forth. But if you look at everything else, everything is geared around the board and our constraints and our vision.
Dr. Savella, what's your input?
I'm confused. I think what most board members are saying, I agree with, that this Vision 3 seems to deal with more adopting the vision and constraints pertaining to the board. But I think in general, that's what this is all about. But when you look at approaches, focus, that number 3, that clearly talks about superintendent constraints. That's what makes it so confusing. Everything else, other than that one column, talks about constraints that in my interpretation would be board constraints. But the one in the middle is very clear in it speaks about superintendent constraints. That's why, I think that's why it's so confusing.
Can I kind of give just my lawyer interpretation?
Sure.
It doesn't really mean anything, but just on the does not mean focus, it defines what a constraint is as a specific
Yes.
prohibition on superintendent authority that are aligning with the vision and grounded in community values. On Meets Focus, it talks about constraints on the board. In the last paragraph, but it calls that a self-constraint. So
Correct.
it kind of differentiates it using those two different words. So I would say constraints on superintendent and self-constraint refers to the board.
So how I interpret it is the self-constraint is determined by the board and not community, while the superintendent's constraint, we need community input. That's just me saying that, just by that word saying self-constraints.
And so we passed, the board votes to pass it for the superintendent constraints, correct?
I'm sorry, say that again?
The superintendent constraints, the board votes and passes on that?
Yes, with community input.
So I guess you could push it out to say the board's vision and constraints includes board self-constraints and superintendent constraints? Because all
See,
those are our technical.
That's what I'm posing the question to you as a board member is, since we self-evaluate ourselves, I don't think we need clarification from our key individuals who helped us through this, because we can determine to make that include board constraints.
Yeah, so in that case, I would say include both. That way we're checking our constraints and the superintendent's constraints. And they're technically board owned because we passed all of those. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay. Mrs. Bravo?
If you read on the very top, Vision 3, it says the board has adopted a vision for what student outcomes will be and has adopted constraints aligned with that vision. We're talking about the board. And if you go to preparing focus, at the very last paragraph says, the board has adopted no fewer than 1 and no more than 5 constraints. 3 is the recommended number. And then under approaches focus, it says and. Each constraint describes a single operational action or class of actions the superintendent may not use or allow. It does not talk about the superintendent's constraint. It's just saying that he is not allowed to.
That's what a constraint is. That's what a superintendent constraint is. The way it's worded, it should say the superintendent will not allow. And so if you look at our constraints, they do say that. And so the progression of this is to, first of all, we didn't have any constraints. And like council said, in parentheses on the does not meet focus, it's specifically talking about the superintendent constraints, not the board constraints.
And also, let me just kind of also add, the vision, it says, and has adopted constraints aligned with the vision.
Yes, so now they're putting parameters on the constraints.
And then you go to the meets focus, and it says the board has adopted 35 self-constraints.
Yes.
So I think that the vision, when it says it has adopted constraints, includes all the constraints we vote on and pass, which includes superintendent.
Yeah, based on what Ed pointed out, and I totally agree with what he pointed out, on that does not be focused. To me, that very clearly talks about superintendent constraint, period. It doesn't speak about anything else.
And then as you meet and master, then you're including board constraints. So that's my question posed again. We self-evaluate ourselves, and I'm okay with whatever y'all decide. But at the last paragraph on the master's focus, the board's vision, and do you want to include the board's constraints? Because the way I read it,
Plural for constraints means the board and the superintendent. That's the question.
yes.
I say.
Because if it does, now we have to involve the community members to constrain ourselves.
Yeah.
How does that look?
I don't know how that looks. Just saying.
Have you all adopted self-constraints?
Yes.
Yes.
What was the process if you get community input?
No, it was just us,
Just
and we review it annually.
just be consistent with how you adopted your self-constraint.
That's what I'm advocating for, but I can be swayed anyway. But if we do include community on those constraints, we're up to revisit in August, our annual. And so then we would have to make sure that community is part of it
And it would be the
in
same.
our
It
discussion.
would be the same process, strategic design meeting? That
On the
this
It
would-
would be our own, it would be ourselves. It would be us having our own workshop, making sure that the
Maybe a
community
board
is
led
involved.
meeting, would that be one of the Wouldn't that be one of the board-led?
Remember the way it
meetings?
was when we didn't have anybody running our annual, when we were revisiting our board operating procedures? It was just us.
Yeah. I see what you're saying.
And so it's a public meeting, but they have no influence, they just sit and watch. But if we are wanting to suffice this paragraph, they will have to be part of the discussion.
But your community members are involved in the development of the vision, right?
Yes, they are.
And that's a board thing.
It was not board-led. We had a third party come in and help.
But that was-
Board participated,
but adopted by the board.
adopted by the board.
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
So I'm personally comfortable having the community help measure the board constraints, self-constraints. So, I mean, I think we need to discuss at a future date what that looks like. But if you ask people to help constrain the board, I think we might have a good turnout.
Tatiana, y'all tell me?
I don't mind involving the community, I'm trying to see what capacity we can do that at.
What do you mean?
How-
Capacity
what that looks
is we post the meeting as a workshop, and we as board members have to make sure that community is present and involved in that development process.
Not just community, students, families, teachers.
All means, community, school community.
Yes.
So it's more than them just attending the public meetings and them actually having a
Discussing,
dialogue and
yes.
discussion.
And that's what I'm saying, so we would need it facilitated, so to what capacity we're gonna do that in, I don't know. You know, it would need to be like. strategic design.
Well, facilitated, we did the facilitated of the student families and teachers,
But
but we did not do it on the board constraints.
correct, we did everything with.
Minus the board constraints.
Right, we did not touch the board constraints. And even yesterday, we didn't review the board constraints. Because that was the board's self, setting their constraints on themselves.
So at a future meeting date, and maybe not just to have a whole thing for board self-constraints, but can we have a discussion including students, families, and teachers, and community members where we discuss board constraints and superintendent constraints at the same meeting?
Okay, we already did superintendent constraints.
Right, but in the future.
Well, in the
those be
future,
consolidated
yes.
into one meeting?
So
Yeah.
August of 2019, when we revisit this again, we would have to abide by this process, what we said today.
But how do we do it initially?
We just wouldn't be at that level, right?
Yes.
We just wouldn't be at 10 until after that August meeting. So, yeah, it's fine with me.
I think if y'all do it, you're gonna be off the chart.
Excuse me?
I think if y'all do it, you're gonna be off the chart. If we include community participation in your job,
We would just be at masters.
you'd be overachievers.
All right, so do I get an agreement to include, yes, Ms. Flores?
I'm still thinking, I'm still debating in my mind.
Okay,
Because I'm hung up with what it means by board's vision and constraints.
Because I had interpreted it as and I could of course be wrong, and I know all of us are running this together. I interpreted this when we were working with our partners, that the community, students, everybody had say on, obviously, the visions, or, you know what I mean, but the goals and the constraints on the superintendent to ensure those constraints would deliver our goals. I was under the impression that the board set themselves, the constraint on themselves.
yeah, because if you really think about it, students, families, and teachers, if they live in our district, they can vote us out. And so that sends a message right there on whether they approve of our constraints or not.
And personally, I actually thought about this the other day because here we are, the superintendent in check, there's checks on the administration, the teachers and principals, and when it comes to the board, we just grade ourselves. And we give ourselves that grade.
But ultimately, your ultimate grade is when you come up for vote, isn't it? I mean, that's how,
Yeah, and I think,
you know what I mean? If that's how the community says, you know what, I'm holding you accountable, yes, you're
doing
we
a
want
good
you
job,
there.
we want you
No, we
there, or
don't.
you're
I
not.
just don't know if that's enough of a thing, you know what I mean? That's one referendum. But maybe throughout our term while we're here, they're kind of, because it's a 4-year term, so that's a long window.
Well, and the only thing I just want us to consider is, does our community, do our students understand what the role of the board is? And could they give us adequate feedback on what a solid board constraint is? And so my interpretation is y'all as board members know your role, y'all been to the board trainings at TASB, you know what I mean? You know what your lane is, and therefore y'all setting constraints on yourselves, and then holding yourselves accountable to those. I mean, I see that being very, you know what I mean? That's one thing I would just kind of put out there is that, does everyone understand the role of what your role is? And because I would hate, because I really believe, I mean, I know at SGS, your board constraints are pretty solid. I've heard compliments on what our board constraints are and how we hold ourselves accountable to them. So that's the only thing I would just maybe, push on y'all or think on y'all, is that I would hate because of a misinterpretation or something, and because of whoever was in the room, the majority change of board constraint that, you know what I mean? That's the only thing, who did not really understand the role of the board.
I'll comment on that. Just 2 points. I think this might actually help people expand their knowledge of what the board does, and saying this is what we do and these are why we have the constraints we do.
That's true.
And the ultimate safeguard is we get to vote for the self-constraints. Is there a change? So if they say no board members allowed to talk more than 30 seconds, well, we're not going to pass that, I don't think.
Right,
So,
that's what I'm saying, like,
Yeah.
we couldn't, okay, and that's, you're right, you're
Yeah,
absolutely,
I'll check
ultimately, y'all
on
have to
that.
approve it, you're right, absolutely, okay.
So I was gonna touch on a couple of those things, and the thing is that as we go through Lone Star governance, and as we become a system of great schools, the more we educate the community, the better. The more we bring them along into the conversation, educate them on what board members should be doing and shouldn't be doing, that's only gonna make our community stronger.
I agree.
So I feel like we bring them into the conversation, we educate them, and then they can participate in board constraints. I don't know that everybody's gonna know what that is at the beginning, but that's the whole point of bringing everybody to the conversation.
the ultimate goal is if I go to HEB and someone says, Mr. McGee, did you follow the board constraint number 1 today? That's ultimately the optimal compliance. So whether or not that's more stress on us, but that's how we feel.
All right. What say y'all on this side? Mr. Rodriguez? Granted.
Are we clear on what it's supposed to mean? I mean, there seems to be a lot of confusion here. I mean, I think we should get some type of interpretation. Just because it was put out like, in a formal format, doesn't mean it's accurate or correct. I mean, it's subject to interpretation in my opinion, and I think we need to.
And Tim, that's why I believe that it's our interpretation that would set it forth.
Well, okay, fine, we set it for our interpretation then, but then we need to put that in concrete.
Consistent.
Yes.
And that needs to be consistent.
Right, exactly.
And so based on that, what say you?
Do we have separate provisions for constraints for the superintendent?
Yes.
And we create those separately. So what we're doing is, we've already graded superintendent, we're doing it again with the board, and so it's a double whammy, if you will. Is that necessary to grade them at the same time with the board constraints?
Okay, so the superintendent's constraints, the reason why we revisit it, they're not supposed to be, I think you can amend the progress measures to the constraint. The constraint itself should stand for at least 3 to 5 years.
Right.
And so why we revisited yesterday was because of the different components coming together, which was the system of great schools. And so that's why it was revisited.
Okay.
Now, the self-constraints on the board, we as a board last year set it to where we revisit them yearly.
Yeah. Okay, so, see, that kind of proved my point, because what I said wasn't exactly what I meant. The superintendent has constraints, and by what I meant by revisiting them, I don't mean like you did yesterday. I'm talking about in this constraint, are we revisiting them again? I mean, after we've already done it anyway, are we doing double work basically.
Meaning like they were, okay, so do I hear you saying that yesterday, we
Well,
went through?
not necessarily yesterday, it said they're already in place.
Okay,
And it's a different vision.
okay,
You know, the superintendent's been graded on his constraints.
right.
So now we have vision 3, which is the board's constraints. Do we have to include the superintendent's constraints again?
Oh, because it was just an item.
Right,
I see.
that's what I'm saying. See, I'm looking at this as something separate from the superintendent's constraints.
That this whole vision here is
Is
more towards
the
board
board.
constraints, not so
Exactly.
much the
That's what I
superintendent
interpret.
constraints.
Well, I think it means the constraints that y'all adopted for the superintendent. Are they
Well,
good constraints?
But even, okay, but here's where the confusing part comes in, and I don't know if it applies to all of them. If you look at our means focus, it says separate from the constraints on the superintendent's authority. You know, it's pushing that out.
Right.
It's not included in there.
So we'll put the self-constraints on the board.
You know, then it goes to the self-constraints on the board, exactly. So I mean,
If
that's
you
what
I
I'm
can
saying.
pull up the constraints, if y'all need the board constraints.
Okay, we can move on. I can get some clarification there, but this is just projection. This is just saying what will be in October.
But I'm just saying.
And I can get some clarification as to what intent does that last statement mean
Yeah,
and how fluid that is in that given year.
I would agree.
Okay, so I can do that. Vision 4. So in Vision 4, we gave ourselves a 0.5, and we'll see if we are a number 1, but I think I can tell you right away we're not, because none of our CPMs had baseline, target, or deadline.
Right.
But we are working on that, so I believe that we will get that for the next quarter. So we're still at a 0.5.
And we plan on bringing those forward, I believe, at the August 15th board meeting.
And I think that we would be at a 5, just based on yesterday.
Yeah. But
Wait.
don't we stay at a 1 because we don't have the targets yet,
No, we stay at a 0.5.
okay.
We don't, because number 1 is the and word. Wait a minute, so let's look at the master focus. Look at what it says on the second paragraph. The board has adopted no fewer than 1 and no more than 3 board self-constraint progress measures. We don't have progress measures for our self-constraints. For each of the self-constraints the board adopted. So I don't even know
Okay, so.
if you would even,
I know
based
on
on
the
the
other
constraints
ones-
we have.
Right, okay, so we need, because I know on the other ones, like the progress measures are administration. I don't know how we would create a progress measure on the board shall not, and these board constraints y'all said, other districts have very similar board constraints. Systems of grades, I mean, if you see Midland, have very similar, so I'm tending to believe that, TEA has blessed these, right, have approved these. So with that, I don't know how we get a self-constraint progress measure on the board collectively and individually shall not perform or appear to perform any of the roles delegated to the superintendent.
It's either a yes or no.
It's either yes or no. And if you, and I think this tracker that y'all are keeping yourselves accountable to every quarter, in my interpretation, again, I could, satisfies that, because y'all are not just, y'all are holding yourselves accountable to the constraints, or holding yourselves accountable to these measurements. So I don't know, I have yet to see a constraint progress measure on the documents I've seen under board constraints. But I can go further and I can dig deeper, but, and Ms.
They're
O'Skeen.
not at a master focus yet.
Right, so maybe that's it. But, I think that's something that we need AJ to give us some feedback on, because,
So there's 2 questions.
right?
There's 2. So we're at a 0.5, is that an agreement?
Yes.
And we project a 4, and I need clarification on 5. All right, accountability 1. We gave ourselves a 0. And it's still a 0, board. We have not met that third paragraph, which is a board. Oh, hold on. Wait. Oh, okay. I can't give ourselves a 1 because we don't have a monitoring report.
Oh, we'll be on that list. We'll have that by August.
So that's why we're at a 0.
So what are you projecting there?
Or calendar.
No, we have the calendar. We don't have, look at preparing to focus 1, that second paragraph.
That's right.
We don't have that one. So we're still at a 0.
Actually, if we get that report, we could probably move to maybe a 12. Because we have an 18-month,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have to just make sure that
And I'm
no fewer than 10% is invested in progress monitoring. And I think if we look at our current 3 months, I think some of them were under 10%. Because we didn't hit a lot of them. We're supposed to be at 50% student outcomes, and I think we hit 20 and 30. And so out of those, we have to.
How do you determine, I guess, how is that, well, and we can talk
Okay.
about this later. We don't have to talk about this now. I know this is,
So
we gotta get through this.
what
but-
determines that is vision 1 through 4. Is we have, when we conduct ourselves in a board meeting, that our discussion is relatable to the student outcome goals and the constraints.
But every board meeting, we have not had a board meeting that did not address
But then
those.
the other, which is everything else, has exceeded that time.
Count minutes.
We count minutes. And so what certain factors have taken place is the appointments. Appointments were interviews, and that carried us over. Currently going
It's
forward
stuff
in
that we
this,
can't control.
That's what
but-
I was saying.
currently
That's,
going forward
I
into
mean,
this next quarter is the superintendent search, and those interviews are gonna put us way past.
I mean, those are things we can't, you
But we're
that
still
have to
held
be done.
accountable.
Okay, all right.
So in this given year, we may not.
Because I also,
accomplish it.
I mean,
But once we reach stability, the board is stable, the superintendent is here, then those are things we can achieve.
because on the days that we do this, we're not going to be, you know what I mean? This takes time to go through each one and.
And this counts?
Oh, this is,
Because-
okay,
yes,
all right.
because we're evaluating.
Because, yeah, because that, okay, great, excellent.
All right, so now we are on, okay, wait a minute, accountability 1, we are at a 0.
Right, because of the monitoring.
And I think we can, I don't think we can do a 4, but that's me. Do y'all think we can do a 4? That would have to be between now and,
Yeah, the
July.
superintendent search is gonna. If you get that monitoring report, when did you say you were getting?
We'll have it by August.
yeah, but to be on 4,
Mhm.
we would have to suffice that third paragraph.
No fewer than 10% are invested in progress monitoring.
Yes.
Oh, and we're not with it, yeah.
Yes.
Not with
Like, for instance, Monday's meeting, that's not gonna happen.
Yeah. For reasons that are out of record.
0, and we project a 1. Just being real, y'all. Accountability 2. We gave ourselves a 0.5, and we said we would be a 0.5. So are we a 0.5? Yes. We're still there. Looking at approaches, the one that's the third paragraph, all board members have completed a training that covered the state's accountability system and agreed that they understand the system. So that's that SB 1566. And so that's due September 1st, I believe. Has everybody done that? So we may be at a 1. Oh, wait, no. Take that back. That fourth paragraph, Dr. Saavedra, is huge, because this is on y'all. The board tracks the average annual cost of staff time spent on governance. This includes the time of any staff member spent preparing for, attending, and debriefing after meetings. This includes all board authorized public meetings as well as all closed session and all hearings. Currently, we're not tracking that.
Up to this point, we have not been tracking.
Yeah. Do you foresee that being tracked in this quarter?
Yeah, well, we can start tracking it.
And
You talking about going back?
No, going forward.
Yeah, we can move forward.
So you think we could be at a 1?
The board, members, quarterly.
I would love to get like, what are
I don't
some
know that
tracking
anyone-
devices?
there's one on
Who's
there.
using it? Like
There's-
who currently has a 1 or a 4, what district? And what tracking devices are they using?
So there's
for
a
staff?
sample
Because
one.
it's, you know,
There's a sample one in the participant manual, and it's basically tracking your own time and.
because I mean, it's hard for me to say this is governance and that, because if my job is data and yeah, data is a requirement to report every board meeting. So
Then it
that's
counts.
governance, but then that's also my job to know data. Do you see what I mean? So there's a lot of our roles, you know
So
what I
on
mean? that
the
lead
Lone
into
Star
both.
Governance Manual, it is page 18 and 19. So it gives you a sample.
And I see that, I just don't know how they, like, what district is able to say
Probably the presentation.
2 hours is, 2 hours of, and continue to calculate that. You know what I'm saying? Because I would consider, even though this is a governance, board governance tonight, our part was academically driven with teachers. That is my job. So does that really say that?
I think it relates to the agenda item that was posted. So the presentation of the implementation plan.
Right.
How long did it take to create it? I'm sure you were already implementing something, so fine tuning it, presenting it, that time frame that it took, preparing it.
Okay.
The allotted time for the person to be here and speaking is included as well.
Okay.
Basically, they want the public and the board to know that there's an investment when we have a meeting, and what that investment is, and whether it's beneficial or not. But if we stay true to the Lone Star Governance Framework and we continue in reporting the student outcomes, then it's beneficial.
It's also asking for hourly rates.
And so it basically means anything pertaining to the business before the board.
Yes.
That's gonna be tough to pinpoint dollar amounts, but
And-
I think we can get close.
I mean, the dollar amount is the easy part. The hard part is keeping up with all the minutes.
The tracking.
That's what my point is, me tracking myself takes time away from what I'm supposed to be doing on instruction or principles or something.
And the time spent keeping time, does that count as time?
That's right, I mean, that's what I'm saying, is that,
Teach us how to do this, y'all keep time all the time.
So just write it down.
so that's, I mean, for
It's
us,
just prioritizing and developing a formula that best fits y'all.
We'll do it.
we'll figure it out.
I have
All right.
a OneNote, and I just add to the OneNote document.
Okay.
Okay, so on accountability 2.
That's right.
Dr. Saavedra said we could be at a 1 next quarter. So we are at a,
Big thing, I'm still here next quarter.
so accountability 2, we are at a 0.5 and we project a 1. Staff are counting on you. And structure. We were at a 1, we projected a 4. And I'm going to defer to you, Michelle. Did we suffice the first paragraph in 4? Did we go over the reporters, did we pull out more than 25%? I forgot to track that. So I know on the April 18th, we were at a 12.5, so we were under for that. For the May 2nd, we had no consent, so we were good on that. The May 16th, 0 were pulled, awesome. So we sufficed it. So we met the first paragraph. Second paragraph, the board limits its adoption of local policies regarding school system operations to matters that are required by law or an appropriate exercise of the board's oversight authority as defined by the board's adopted constraints. I think we've been true to that. Everything's been in consent. I don't think at the top of my head we've had anything for discussion and possible action that was not part of constraints. Okay, so we've met 4. Are we at a 12? There are no more than 4 board authorized public meetings per month, and none last more than 3 hours. We've not, let me look through what I read.
We don't have more than 4, so we've met that.
Okay,
3
so
hours.
We've met the limit of 3 hours.
3 hours, as I believe it, does not include closed session. This closed session we can't control if we have, what's it called? Attorney-client things.
Okay. Well, if you don't count closed session, we might make,
I can resist.
we'd have to look at each one.
Okay, so for the first one,
On the time use tracker, the total minutes is without closed session.
okay, so the first meeting was 234 minutes. That is way over 3 hours. That's way over 3 hours.
3 hours.
All right, so we're not at 12, we're at a 4. So for structure, we are at a 4. And we're gonna not be at 12 because of the superintendent interview. So I think we stay at a 4. All are in agreement for that?
Yes.
All right, so then the next one is advocacy. And, hold on. Oh man, lost my place. All right, advocacy, we were at a 0. We projected a 0. Are we still at a 0? And we're still at a 0. So, we have 3 months board, set up board-led meetings, board member-led community engagement. I think we had a plan that kind of fizzled, and so I think we need to regroup and have that again. Board, currently the individuals on that committee was myself, Mr. Munguia, and Mrs. Guerra. Are we in agreement to keep it at those 3, or do we want to change that? The committee to plan out the board member-led community engagement activities.
That's probably, we might want to check in this together if your plans have changed with that, but I think that we can have something in place for the next time we grade ourselves. And the only reason why we tabled that recently was because of TRE and other issues that have been coming up before the board. So I know we have a draft of that somewhere. And I think we just put some dates on it right now. I think that we could match that, because it would be a system in place. Dates would change, but it would be something to be expected of.
Yeah, but it has to be done.
That's what.
We have to have the meeting.
Oh, I'm not sure.
To get out of the 0,
Yeah.
we have to have the meeting.
I'm not sure if we can have one. But,
Board,
By when?
October. So we would have to have one either this month, next month, or,
Well, we're going to be getting to the superintendent search and
So that would that be a board-led two-way meeting? Can it be a board-led two-way meeting?
On the superintendent search,
The public meeting we were anticipating having?
I think no, because the firm is gonna lead it,
Okay. Yeah.
because it's structured. Now, we can have one in addition,
Yeah, we can set up our own.
and so are you in agreement of having one set up? We just need to have one between the next 3 months. For me, I probably say I couldn't lead it, so I couldn't help out. I could plan it for you, but I don't think I could be there.
Does a meeting like the one at Palo Alto, because it wasn't board-led, I suppose. We were
Have to be
invited.
board elect,
Yeah.
so we would have to take charge.
Yeah. I'd be willing to help work on that with
Can it
anybody.
not be incorporated into the meeting rate?
Meet and greet.
For the superintendent selection, I think that's after the deadline would run out.
Yeah, because that would be September.
Oh,
What day in October is that?
No, it has to be, so October is what we're self-evaluating for July, August, and September. So the deadline has to be September 31st. Before that.
Depending on your timeline, that could be possible.
Okay, we can shoot for it. So I then give ourselves a when.
yeah.
So for advocacy, we're at a 0 and we project a 1. Unity, we were at a 3 and we projected a 9. Okay, the board has to answer, are we currently at a 3? So I know we hit the first one, paragraph. The second one, yes. The third one, the board has set the expectation that information provided by the superintendent to one board member is provided to all board members. All board members are in agreement to that one? Okay, so then the next one is the board completed the most recent quarterly progress. Yes, and we voted to approve it. We did do that one. 9, attendance for all board members at board authorized public meetings was equal to or greater than 80%. Yes. All board members have completed all statutorily required trainings. Yes. The board completed the most recent quarterly progress tracker and supermajority of the board voted to approve it. And the last one, it was, correct? All board members agree that they are responsible for the outcomes of all students, not just students in their region of the school system. So what say you board members? I say yes to me.
Yeah.
Okay, so 10, the board received a certificate of completion of the months or no, we haven't received that. So we're at a 9. Unity, we're at a 9. I don't see ourselves getting a 10. Do I hear different?
I'm not sure we can get to a 10.
Okay, so projection is 9 for next one?
9.
All right. So our total is 44. So did we grow? Yes, we grew by almost half. And what is our projected?
47. Well, because we have the 1 to be determined. And then if you take the 4 up to a 5, then you'll get 1 more.
Okay.
Awesome.
Wow, we set low standards for ourselves, y'all, because I think our projection has to be 25% growth. So, just know that. All right, so do I hear a motion to approve the quarterly tracker? Move to approve. Do I hear a second?
Second.
So a motion has been made by Mrs. Flores, seconded by Mr. Ibarra. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Number 2. Discussion and possible action to approve the election order calling for the regular election of trustees in single-member districts 1, 4, and 6, and calling a special election of trustees in single-member district 3. Before I open it up for discussion, do I hear a motion?
I'll move to approve.
And it's open for discussion. Board members, are there any
Did you need a
concerns,
second
comments,
for
or
that?
questions?
Do you need a second for that?
Not for the discussion.
Okay.
I just, one technicality on the election order itself. Dr. Did we, the staff, come up with the election order? Who prepared the election? Okay. And council, my question is to you. On page, I guess article number 6, resolution for joint elections, that early voting by mail may be conducted in addition to any other manner permitted by law by making application for ballots to the early voting clerk at the office of the Bexar County Elections Administrator, and the address you have is 203 West Nueva, Suite 3.61. Are the mail ballots going to their old office because they moved to the office on Clear City Road?
We will adjust that.
That was a mistake.
Yes.
Okay. That's the only error that I could find on there. This is some others, but that's all. Everything else looks okay. But I did have, for council, just one question. Because we're going to be having an election, when we're having the TRE election now, and we're going to have a school board election, at the last meeting I asked you if an employee advocates for, let's say, the TRE, and I gave you an example at the last meeting about an employee advocating at a school function, and you had said, no, they cannot advocate for or against. So in the same manner, the school district, come to school board election time, is the school district allowed to use information having to do with, and this is a purpose what I'm referring to, information having to do with students as far as names, addresses, phone numbers that are from the PRC. Is that something the district can use to talk about an election that is coming up? Because it's a FERPA law, and I may be wrong, but I thought that was a violation of the law.
Well, names, addresses, and other directory information is not part of FERPA, and that's in our policy that is at the local. And we define what that is, so most, everybody has the same policy by CASB, so more than likely, none of that information is covered by FERPA. Student addresses, grades, not grades, but grade level, and you know, that's not covered by FERPA directory information. The underlying question, I think, is the school district cannot support any board candidate for office, just like the TRE can advocate for any.
Can't advocate, that's correct. So it's not a violation of FERPA law?
No, I mean, to use student directory information. that's
From a
not-
PRC, you can use
I don't know
that.
what the PRC is.
Every student at a campus has to fill out a card, and I think it's called personal, help me here.
Permanent.
What is it?
It's an AGR card. It's an AGR card.
PRC
Is it? Yes, the program.
It's a card that each time,
Has their information.
information card that the campus has, that has the information as far as the student's name, address and phone number, who the parents are, who has the right to pick up a child, who does not. And
So some of that
is
stuff
kept-
is covered by FERPA. I'll read the policy verbatim so everybody's on the same page. It's South San Board Policy FL, local. And it's going to be on the last page, and it's labeled directory information. The district has designated the following categories of information as directory information: student name, address, telephone listing, electronic mail address, photograph, date and place of birth, major field of study, degrees, honors, and award received, dates of attendance, grade level, most recent educational institution attended, participation in officially recognized activities and sports, and weight and height of members of athletic teams. So all that information that I just read, directory information, is not covered by FERPA. Everything else left out of that paragraph is covered by FERPA.
Okay, so you're saying that the district can use that, whether to make calls in support of a proposition or not, or for an elected candidate?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
No, the district can't advocate for a proposition or a candidate.
But they can use that information then to make calls or make
That
business?
information, if somebody submits a PIA, Open Information Act request for that information, it's public.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to clarify.
Yes.
Okay.
And just to go on that real quick, the district can utilize that to disseminate information about a school district election?
Not necessarily advocate for.
No, not advocate, inform.
But inform the election dates. They can.
Right, inform of an election and election dates, but not necessarily specifying a candidate or yes or nay, for or against.
The district, yeah, there's no issue with the district disseminating information with respect to an upcoming election, just like the district's doing now with the TRE.
Right.
There's no advocating, it's just straight information.
So Ben, let me ask you, what we're talking about is, I believe, director information?
Yes, sir.
And so that is public information as at the request of anyone.
Yes.
And just like the public can utilize that information to disseminate whatever they need to disseminate, the district can use that information to disseminate facts, information, but no advocacy.
Correct.
Correct? Yeah. But others can request that information from the
For
district
advocacy purposes.
and for advocacy purposes.
And it would be public information.
Got it.
Okay. Now,
Madam Chair, with my response, and if you don't have a second, I'd like to second it.
Okay. Is it closed for discussion? All right, so a motion has been made by Mrs. Flores, seconded by Mrs. Prado. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion carries. And then the last piece. Discussion and action, possible action on the superintendent search process. Dr. Saavedra. Or is that me?
it's yours.
Okay. I would defer to the firm, Mr. Gavin James.
Wonderful. All right. Good evening, Madam President, distinguished members of the board, members of the executive cabinet, and community. Thank you for having me this evening. I'd first like to say thank you to all the staff, the cabinet, community members that are here. We've conducted a variety of in-person meetings last week and this week, and everyone has been wonderful. Delighted to work and meet with everybody, and want to express my sincere gratitude to everybody here in the room this evening for your participation. So thought it was worth noting that your executive cabinet and the folks that serve here in South San have been tremendous. So want to thank you for that. All right, if I may, for the record, my name is James Geva, President and CEO of JG Consulting, representing the firm this evening. On behalf of my colleagues, I also like to say thank you. So we're going to go through the executive search timeline this evening. And so what you'll hear this evening are some of the activities, dates, and times. And so I'll do my best to go slowly so that for the record, everybody can take note. But please know that a final copy of this iteration, which I am running through this evening, will be provided to the board tomorrow for one last grant of approval. And then this document will also be posted on the district's website no later than tomorrow. All right, so search activity, board named JG Consulting on June 20th. Online surveys were posted June 28th. Meet with trustees and conduct interviews, July 9th and 10th. School board to approve timeline, that was this evening, July 18th. Conduct community and district staff meetings, July 11th through July 20th. Meet with the board to share community feedback and approve candidate profile, July 23rd. The tentative timeline, or time frame, excuse me, for that date would be 7:30 p.m. Application period and online interviews will commence July 24th through August 22nd, with a notation and a disclaimer that during that 30-day time frame, we will also host a town hall meeting and invite community members, staff, anyone who is interested in providing JG Consulting with candid feedback as it pertains to the superintendent search process is welcome to join us for a town hall meeting. The location and the time is to be determined, but I will work with staff to identify a venue and an appropriate time to invite everyone. Search team to review and identify the top 10 candidates, August 24th. Meet with the board and present the top 10 candidates for in-person interview selections, August 27th. Candidate interviews with the board, September 5th through the 6th. And I should note that that is the first round of in-person interviews. If needed, round 2 of candidate interviews with the board would be September 11th through the 12th. And again, that is if there is a second round needed. And that is typically done with the top 2 candidates for consideration. Board names lone finalists September 12th or the 13th. And so from whichever date we identify, the 12th or the 13th of September, the 21-day period will begin that very day. So naming of the permanent superintendent will either take place October 3rd or the 4th. Are there any questions from the board or community?
Board members, the floor is open. Mrs. Gallo and then Ms. Flores.
I think Ms. Flores had raised her hand.
Okay, Ms. Flores.
Thank you. Mr. Guerra, just for clarification, going back to round 1 interviews, September 5th and 6th, you said that if needed, then we would go to round 2, but if not needed, then would would the board be naming a lone finalist right after the 5th and 6th?
Correct, so fantastic question. So theoretically, yes, if we as a board chose not to have or conduct a second round of interviews, you could in theory name your lone finalist, let's say hypothetically September 6th or the 7th. And so that could alter the dates of the 21-day starting time period and also the naming of your permanent superintendent. So when I provide this documentation to the district tomorrow and to you as a board, I will have those disclaimers in the footer as a notation to call attention to that possibility.
Okay.
So wonderful question, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Flores? Ms. Gallo.
I just have one question, and I think we had discussed it. Since we're going to be naming the lone finalist either September or October, by law, the district does not allow to have 2 superintendents on paid salary. So what are the board's options?
And paid salary during the 21-day time period or during the, I guess I just need clarification.
From the time that we name the lone finalist.
Well, the superintendent who is incoming can serve as a per diem with his or her daily rate, whatever your base salary is. So again, I think that would be a decision for the board to make. It is not the firm stance to make that final determination. And I would encourage you to seek advice from council with regard to avoiding any conflict.
Council, what say you?
So when we get to that point, I would advise that we place it on the agenda and we talk about it in closed session. And then we'll have a conversation with Dr. Salvador. But there's ways to facilitate transition as possible.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Are there any other comments, questions, or concerns? I have one. On July 9th and 10th, you met with trustees and conducted interviews. Were all 7 able to be interviewed?
No, ma'am. We were missing Mrs. Guerra.
Thank you. That was it. Okay. So do I hear a motion to approve the timeline? Does it have to be worded certain way? Okay, so I make a motion to approve the timeline as presented. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second has been made by Mr. Rodriguez. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Do I hear a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Oh, I'm sorry, citizens still heard.
You still here, Tom?
I'm here to drag this out.
And I am so sorry.
It'll take longer.
This is is my 30 minute sweepstakes. I'm adding up all the time I didn't get.
Turn down 45 minutes.
Even turning the mic off. You confess to it.
I did it premature then. You're good, that's not.
Mr. Cummings, I don't think we have to read the guidelines to the citizens to be heard. I will keep track of time. You do have 3 minutes. And when you're ready.
I will be very fast. That's just my requirements. Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Zavadra, members of the audience and staff. My name is Tom Cummings and I'm representing the South San EFT. I'd left a sheet of paper up there at your desk, which is a true-false test on public school versus charter schools. We're using this to educate our members, other employees, as well as community. AFT in Bear County has a major goal this coming school year to educate as many as we can about the falsehoods that are put out about public schools and the false brags that are put out about charter schools. Just for your information, everything on here is true. We just wanted to make it simple. It's the starter conversation for what we're going to be doing. We'd like to invite you to do some of this. The other thing I wanted to mention real quick is that South San AFT does support the TRE, and we've begun working on that. Had it passed 10 years ago, and I hate to keep reminding people, but I think it's important. South San would have had an extra $60 million to work with. We've heard that objections that schools have been closed. We guess if we had that $60 million, schools probably would not have been closed. We will keep on working for this because we don't want to see more schools closures. We don't want to see experienced employees leave this district and go other places. And some have left for the very reason they're not sure that the TRE will pass. And so there's a loss of programs that we're could possibly face, and we want to build South San upwards. We don't want this to continue anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did I hear a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion has been made by Mr. Munguia, seconded by Mr. Ibarra. The time is 9:52. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion carries.